Worried about energy prices, the economic impact of renewables, and whether it's all a scam? Well, turns out the economic impact of going green can be problematic, but maybe no longer in the way you expect. In fact, Donald Trump may well be onto something in saying there's a scam. And surprisingly, maybe he could help combat a genuine scam driving up energy prices. But since the scam would be using net zero to justify increased energy costs while adding renewables that are now said to be delivering savings, if renewables really can deliver the savings, his approach would also deny us seeing those reduced energy costs. This video looks at cases where renewables definitely have provided savings, and also how several factors combine to restrict who gets the savings. If there are savings, then maybe we no longer even need net zero to justify using renewables. And an even better solution might be to maximise the savings and simply ensure everyone benefits. Welcome to a One Finite Planet video that looks at why, if renewables are now the lowest cost solution, we don't seem to be seeing any reduction in energy prices. And why is it that everyone signed onto the Paris Accord back when renewables were the most expensive form of energy, but now when, for example, solar panels fall into 1/15th what they were and should now be enabling reduced energy prices, despite temperature increases accelerating, many want to stop? Is it that the slogan "Save the Planet" suggests a need to suffer financially, which means people accept increased energy prices even if they're a scam, enabling our economic and political system to prioritise protecting the revenues and commercial interests of energy and fossil fuel companies over equitably delivering reduced energy prices to consumers? This video looks at rooftop solar, one of the few ways proven to enable slashing energy bills, and how it's underutilised and deployed in ways that can be inequitable and can increase prices for those most needing assistance with the cost of living. Chapters cover how, from Paris to now, it seems always the in theory most expensive energy that gets the support. How rooftop solar is delivering real savings, but its implementation is constrained and can even raise prices for those who don't have it. And how net zero goals can have for energy become a distraction, feeding a scam to limit reduction of both energy prices and of emissions. The Paris Accord was signed in 2015, as shown on screen, a legally binding agreement between 195 countries, all committing to transform their energy production despite the costs, in order to reduce emissions and limit human contribution to climate to at most 2 degrees C, 4.5 Fahrenheit. Agreed in 2015 when, as the graph shows, renewables meant more expensive energy. So all anticipated, the commitment meant increased energy costs in order to save the planet. Or, as I explain in other videos, I'd suggest would better be described as keeping the planet the way that suits us. Yet, despite temperatures having risen faster than predicted, and at least in theory renewable energy having fallen below the cost of traditional sources, many countries push back, saying now we can't afford that cost, or our contributions to global emissions are too small to be enough to matter, or we're spending more than others. This meant that in 2015 there was political pressure to move to what was then the most expensive energy. And now in 25, the political pressure is again to move to what is now the most expensive energy. All that's changed is which is most expensive. Either the most expensive energy always has the biggest budget for lobbyists to help convince politicians their energy type can both boost the share market and, as explained later, GDP, or the claim that renewables are now the least expensive way to produce energy is just theory which never translates into practice. And those lobbyists do actually care about our best interests rather than corporate profit. I mean, if renewables really are the lowest cost energy source, then why target 2050 for net zero instead of just moving to renewables and the savings as fast as we can? If renewables are less expensive anyway, shouldn't the Paris Agreement not really matter anymore, at least as far as energy is concerned? While renewables lowering energy bills can seem only theoretical, there's one form of renewable energy that does have a sound and proven track record: rooftop solar. I know of people, even actively against climate action, who've installed rooftop solar simply because it saves them money. Rooftop solar not only already works, it continues to get even better. Since Paris in 2015, the efficiency of mass-market solar panels has grown from 17% to 22%, almost one-third more power from the same area. While at the same time, the cost of the panels has been collapsing and is now down to around 1/15 what it was in 2015. And solar continues to see huge cost reductions plus efficiency gain. This progress, as well as making solar in general more compelling, as fully covered in a video to be linked below, has an even greater impact on rooftop solar than on solar farms, for the reasons as shown on screen, but in summary, rooftop solar needs no dedicated real estate and can allow a reduction in transmission infrastructure, eliminating two of the big cost components for solar farms. Yes, installing panels on roofs is more expensive than in fields and requires more panels per area as roofs aren't optimally aligned, but panel prices keep falling, and as energy suppliers recover installation costs through resellers, consumers still pay a premium on those installation costs. Despite reducing energy costs, the twist is rooftop solar can actually increase commercial energy prices per kilowatt hour. Those with rooftop solar don't pay, so their savings aren't reflected in energy prices. Plus, the grid's still there, and reducing consumption through the grid can increase prices for those without rooftop solar. Grid costs are fixed, so if you only bought 1 kilowatt hour of energy, you'd have to fund the whole grid with just that 1 kilowatt hour. There are other challenges, as of course that the sun doesn't always shine, and storage costs are still high. Upcoming chapters will address those issues, but the challenge could be our current economic system and how economic indicators react to transferring energy production from business to consumers. I'm using Sydney, Australia as a reference location for viability of home solar, with relevance for the rest of the globe to then follow. Why Australia? Continually falling prices and efficiency gains of solar panels mean every year their viability increases. So viability in Australia can allow predicting what will soon become viable elsewhere, and specifically Sydney, because while for Australia overall the pattern and mix of housing reflects the low national population density, Sydney, as a city of over 5 million, is quite unlike most of Australia, and is far more like that found internationally. Note the summary by AI now shown on screen. Okay, so for background on what's happening with solar in Sydney, consider this article from major Sydney newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald, in October 2025, linked below, plus some observations from 2 examples of the experience of installing home solar in Sydney. The news article, titled "You're Putting Too Much Solar on the Roof," begins citing that dramatic 15 times reduction in solar cell prices, then suggesting this now so low cost tempts installation of more solar panels than needed in the hope of being able to profit from selling excess energy back to the grid, and cautions against it. Key points to note from that article. Owning solar panels now costs significantly less than buying electricity from the grid. Most owners of freestanding homes have space for far more rooftop solar than they need. Excess solar energy may be just wasted or even increase energy prices for the individual, as grid operators may at times penalise homeowners who send excess solar to the grid. Now for 2 specific experiences. Firstly, Chris, who previously explained how his system recovered installation costs in less than 2 years, and even without batteries, slashed his energy costs. The savings are not just in theory, they're real and proven. And there's a full video on this channel linked below on Chris's experience with home solar. His system produces enough solar to meet family needs even on a cloudy midwinter day, when solar energy can be not just half, but on a cloudy day, a quarter of that available on a sunny summer's day. The energy provider sets limits on how much solar a system can produce for any installation connected to the grid, in order to cap the maximum power that can, if unused at the home, potentially flow back into the grid. This constrains installation maximum power output, with the result that even on a cloudy midwinter day, not all the energy from Chris's solar panels will be used. Currently, Chris does get a rebate for sending energy back to the grid, but the value of the rebate falls each year. And while Chris's energy provider has yet to introduce penalties for power sent back to the grid, that could come. And if it does, Chris would need to install extra controls to ensure his system generates even less of what it could potentially generate, and mean on a summer's day, often below 1/4 of the potential could be used. Just as well, panels cost so little and there's plenty of roof space. The second example is someone with plans for future alterations to the house roof, which means for now, adding panels to only the garden shed roof, which of course is far smaller than the house roof. Yet with firming from a battery, it's been calculated just a garden shed roof, in this case, can be sufficient to effectively eliminate future energy bills. While solar panels have been rising in popularity in Sydney for years, there's a new factor. The national government introduced battery subsidies in May 2025, bringing forward anticipated future battery price reductions. The subsidies, combined with continually falling prices, have grown the market, and the scale has improved efficiencies of the supply chain. All combined is change from below 10% of those with solar installing 10 kilowatt hour of batteries that cost over 10,000 Australian dollars to now most who do the maths and can install over 40 kilowatt hours of battery for as little as 7,000 Australian dollars. Although, in the rush and competition for installers and supplies, surge conditions mean prices vary enormously. In summary, currently the savings reduce energy bills, but not the rate paid when buying energy, which hides the benefits when people talk about the price of energy. Plus, there's potential for far more energy from rooftop solar. So why isn't more being done to eliminate the barriers, including those imposed by energy suppliers, and spread the benefits? While the full potential amount of home solar possible in Sydney and in other locations is covered in later chapters, first consider a hypothetical. What if, at least one day, rooftop solar batteries could meet entire energy needs of Sydney? As a huge city, this is more challenging than almost anywhere else in Australia, so potentially even for all of Australia. Based on the experiences of those in Sydney, even when most of solar energy becomes wasted, an investment equal to only a few years of energy bills can be sufficient to fund a system that can provide for most or even all future energy needs. A future with little more than just maintenance as the only future energy costs? This would be devastating for energy providers. Their future role, if any, would become only that of balancing supply between those able to produce more energy than they need and those in the highest density housing who still need more energy than their roofs can produce. It would, of course, also end the revenue for fossil fuel companies from supplying power stations who generate energy. This would create redundancies, and as these are major businesses, cause a fall in the stock market. And it would arguably reduce Australia's GDP. Yes, if this happened nationally, and end consumer reliance for any other form of generation from the grid, then it would arguably reduce Australia's GDP by as much as 10%. How could saving people from needing to buy energy reduce GDP? GDP, as more technically explained in other videos here, and by the on-screen formula, is about the value of goods and services produced. How do you measure the total value of what's produced? By how much is paid for those goods and services. This creates the result that saving consumers money, at least by itself, reduces C in the formula, and thus GDP. There'd still be as much energy produced, it's just not paid for. And in fact, energy produced could increase. There'd still be as much wealth as before, just less spending on energy. This, of course, is reminiscent of the broken window fallacy, as events that cause people to spend arguably don't really boost the economy because people can only spend more when they have more to spend. Potentially, it just changes spending. The savings give people more to spend on other things. However, those arguing against can say this could increase inflation or imports, and so needn't prevent a fall in GDP. These concepts, as explained in the Economy is Like an Ed Farm videos, all mean GDP can increase even during a cost of living crisis and fall when things get better. GDP reflects the experience of businesses, but can provide a very distorted view of what consumers experience. Regardless of what's suggested by GDP, provided benefits are distributed, overall people would benefit. But because it's at least arguable that GDP would fall, it gives fossil fuel and energy industries a story. And they have the advertising budget and the lobbyists to make their story very compelling. Clearly, powerful industry groups have billions of reasons to not want everyone, or even a significant percentage of everyone, to move to home solar. And the more people who could move, the more energy dependent they come by moving, the less relevant energy companies, wind farms, solar farms, and fossil-fueled or nuclear power stations would become, and the more pushback will come from their proponents. But just how much of people's energy needs could be supplied by home solar? Let's start with Sydney, then Australia, then beyond. From a science perspective, I'm a theorist, not an experimentalist, and I'm relying on commonly available data. In this world of AI, where this can mean asking the right questions, and by showing the questions, everyone can verify those answers. Okay, so the readily available data. The total land area of Greater Sydney. Answer 12,500 square kilometres, which is 1.5 times the size of Greater London and significantly larger than the 5 boroughs of New York, but less than the tri-state area, although I'll discuss comparison implications next chapter. Total annual energy use of those within Greater Sydney. For 2023, the 5.3 million of Sydney consumed between 120 and 130 petajoules, the main energy sources being electricity and gas. Ignoring for now the need for energy storage, what percentage of the area of Sydney would need to be covered with common low-cost solar panels to generate that 120 to 130 petajoules per year? The answer I got was 1.62% of land area, and as explained in The Devil is in the Details video, this was originally calculated by AI and needed some testing. It at first didn't sufficiently allow for shading, but also used outdated 18% cells, and after many iterations, it turns out it's in practice about right if using 20% efficiency panels that have been the main low-cost panels since 2020. In fact, looking forward a few years, with current 2025 low-volume, state-of-the-art technology scheduled to become mainstream soon, the required percentage could fall below 1%, as discussed in a later chapter. For reference, approximately what percentage of that 120 to 130 petajoules is for domestic use? Answer, the data is not precise, but between 1/3 and 1/2. Okay, what percentage of the area of Sydney is currently rooftops? Not solar, just rooftops. Answer, 2.5 to 3% of the area of Sydney is already covered with rooftops. So more than enough rooftop area for, if everywhere feasible has solar and you have enough storage, Sydney wouldn't need any external energy for commercial or domestic use. No wind farms, no external solar farms, no grid connection. Now you may think that can't be correct. Let's check. 2023 data for Australia has 35 to 40% of suitable homes with solar, and in total produce 20 to 25% of domestic energy consumed. Take the averages, and if 37% of homes can produce 22% of household energy, then 100% of suitable homes could produce 60%. Not 100%, but remember that warning not to install solar beyond your own needs, plus limits on what energy providers allow? Clearly people aren't installing all that would be possible, and since most installations happen when panels cost more, just enough panels and only the optimal section of roof made sense. Moving to every roof with solar, and 50% more solar than today, would bring it to 100%, and from all the data, that looks feasible. So yes, it adds up that Sydney could power itself with a combination of solar panels and batteries, but reliably? And would it be worth it? Getting enough solar requires taking advantage of the falling price of panels, and not as previously, just on areas of roofs facing the ideal direction, but even on areas where the panels are less effective, and sharing the energy. The reduction in panel prices already may make the panel cost justified, but no matter how much roof area is covered by panels, storage is needed, as energy is still only generated when the sun shines. Yeah, there are solar panels that can provide energy from infrared at night, but no. You can't produce enough energy from infrared panels for any significant contribution. Providing enough energy for times when the sun isn't shining brightly enough or at all requires either a global grid, which we'll leave aside for now, or energy storage. And as discussed in another video linked below, and also on screen, there are levels. Level 1, just managing overnight. Level 2, managing a multi-day cloudy stretch. Level 3, what's referred to as Dunkelflaute, but in solar terms it's only the dunkel, or darkness, that matters, and this is dealing with a worst case annual stretch of dark days. Level 4 is dealing with how, as you move from the equator, you get progressively less sun in winter, and my level 5, managing the potential for a stretch of 1 or more consecutive bad years. So what's the cost and what's practical? So far, it's been about consumers and business reducing their own energy costs. So, level 1, prior to the Australian government initiative to subsidise battery purchases, which is generally expressed as effectively providing a 30% discount for home battery systems, even level 1 battery support was rare, with less than 10% of homes with solar having a battery. However, the combination of improving the cost equation, falling battery prices and increased availability of larger, more cost-effective batteries means having only level 1 support is far less cost-effective than going further. Level 2. While it was anticipated subsidies would make level 1 battery systems more attractive to more Australians, the reality is in practice everyone I know is finding at least level 2 is actually more cost-effective. The government scheme offers a rebate per kilowatt hour of energy storage, and consumers can now gain at least the benefits of level 2 with less expense than was previously required for level 1. Those even with quite low levels of solar are finding significant energy saving. Level 3 and level 4, moving up from level 2, can be enabled several ways. The simplest is by having excess solar, or in the time window while the grid winds down, some support from the grid power to charge during the around 1 month in winter during years when that month is wet and cloudy. Being able to make excess solar available to others requires either adding even more storage, in some cases from the batteries of an EV or hybrid, or as battery prices fall further, and harnessing that excess solar will become viable should total cost of battery systems fall to around between half or 1/4 of the current price paid by consumers, which is expected. Level 5 requires almost no additional cost over level 4, as it can use existing infrastructure. It would, of course, still come at a cost to homeowners, although it should rarely ever be needed. Ideally, this backup generation could be provided by e-fuels produced using excess solar energy, keeping ongoing costs extremely low, but that would require new infrastructure. While there could be enough energy to supply everyone in Sydney, the government scheme was positioned as a way for consumers to save on energy bills and reduce the cost of living. The system design limits for now the benefits of dramatically reducing or eliminating the cost of energy to those consumers who own their own home rather than renting, are in a position to invest, and are in detached or semi-detached residences. Plus, as that news article raised, there's little and perhaps zero incentive for those with potential to produce energy beyond their own needs to produce that excess and supplement those with less roof area. This is proving the concept and viability, but a lot more would need to be done to realise the full potential. Battery prices need to keep falling. More needs to be done to enable solutions for those not meeting the criteria, and the system needs to encourage and support people having systems that can export energy. On battery prices, while it can look like they've fallen just 4 times in the same period panel prices have fallen much faster, there's more to the story. No, consumer prices are much higher than the at scale for lithium-ion battery prices of over $100 per kilowatt hour, see graph, so would still be prohibitive. But Australian consumers have rapidly moved to lower priced LFP battery, where the at scale price is US $75 per kilowatt hour. And other types will continue price falls, such as CATL brand Naxtra sodium battery, scheduled to be released by year-end 2025 and promising eventually US $10 to $20 per kilowatt hour, although I suspect early pricing will be more like US 40 to 50. Battery prices are still up to 5 years from the level of justifying rushing all the way to 100%, but installations take time, and it'd be inefficient to rush closing down current energy supplies, but it would be possible if governments were willing to take a more effective approach to reducing costs. Much of the consumer-priced battery system costs are in the supply chain, and while increased volumes do reduce those costs, governments taking a role in procurement and owning some of that infrastructure as a national asset, as was the case for electricity supply in the past, could make more sense than having a supply chain that increases prices and then giving rebates to bring the prices back down again. Societies like Australia that regard healthcare as a human right use bulk negotiated pricing for pharmaceuticals that are considered essential, although that sacrifices business profits and arguably additional GDP. Should, as was the case when electricity was first introduced, the concept of energy as a right for everyone be restored? Every society keeps some monopoly assets, such as the footpaths and or sidewalks, to get to and from our homes in public ownership. But where it makes sense to draw the line, together with more details including export potential, is to be left for another video, which will be linked below. But some government role could allow addressing how to bring equity to the distribution of savings, just as how governments equitably distributed costs during the original energy rollout, and could, in this case, allow for providing returns on panel investments for individuals rather than to big corporations. If Australia was to seriously embrace the concept of lowest price energy, it could slash, if not eliminate, energy bills for all consumers and give the nation a competitive advantage. For government to own battery infrastructure, as was historically the case for energy, could be required to provide savings for those most in need, and that would require significant investment. But for the entire Australia, less investment than currently proposed for energy alternatives, and not investment at the same level as the current Australian submarine project, despite in this case there being a clear economic return and benefit to the people, an improvement in future business competitiveness, but also requires addressing the misleading objections on GDP, the stock market, and employment energy and fossil fuel companies could raise to sway public opinion. And currently, those are the very industries tasked with providing the energy. For energy and fossil fuel industries, mass migration to rooftop solar, when those industries don't own the rooftops, could be suicidal for them. But taking those industries on could be suicidal for government. It's not the end of the energy industry, as while, yes, some energy within Sydney is for business, but a lot's not. Aluminium smelters and extremely energy-intensive industries require significant energy generation. And although some of those could also generate their own energy, there's still a business of providing for energy-intensive industries and for export. In conclusion, yes, given appropriate government policy, to the extent an area or country is comparable to Sydney in terms of population density, roof area per person, consumer electricity consumption, and latitude/sunlight, that area could achieve up to 100% of consumer energy needs from rooftop solar alone, once batteries fall below the tipping point price. But how does that translate for rooftop solar around the planet? As shown by the table on screen, it's already significant, even before batteries reach tipping point pricing, and in many cases, with the typical grid restrictions on dealing with excess energy. 3 factors constrain the potential for going further elsewhere: energy usage per person, population density, or specifically the ratio of rooftop area to people, and thirdly, sunlight per area of roof. This is in comparison to Sydney the city, not Australia in general, and the goal is providing energy for entire nations, not just for the most challenging locations in the form of most densely populated cities. For the first factor, just note that domestic energy consumption, excluding out-of-home consumption such as transport, in Australia, including Sydney, is, as per the quote on screen, higher than even in the US and much higher than within Europe, even though total per person energy consumption is higher in the US. The second factor is population density, and while Australia overall is atypically sparse, the comparison is just Sydney because it's a part of Australia that's an example of reasonably high density area, somewhat like other areas or entire countries internationally. Greater Sydney is a large city with a dense inner city and lower density outer areas, resulting in an overall mix of housing and population density, not like the density of the city of Brussels or the city of Newark, but similar to the nation of Belgium, or at 2/3 density relative to the most densely populated state of the USA, New Jersey. Even in Sydney, solar began in outer areas, and only now with batteries and improved efficiency can enough extra energy be produced in outer areas to fully support the inner, most densely populated areas. You don't start in a Brussels or a Newark or do them alone. You start with the less dense areas and work inward. City-states, without any less populated fringe areas like Hong Kong or Singapore, are unlikely to ever be sufficient on rooftop solar alone, even with upcoming more efficient panels. The table on screen gives some examples, but Sydney's population density is around 360 people per square kilometre, And simplistically, other things being equal, less densely populated areas should be easy, and double population density would limit reliance on rooftop solar to 50% at current efficiency levels. That's simplistic, and the combination of factors does get complex, which is why, to shorten this one, I'll also link some other videos. Note that around 50% of those in Greater Sydney live in apartments. But it also matters how tall those apartment blocks are, and patterns vary from country to country. For example, Brazil, despite being a very large country with lots of sun, has quite a high percentage of apartment living nationwide, while national average population density of India is not that different from Sydney. That population density is for the entire nation, including farmland. So, although electricity use is much lower, it's still a constraint. And Bangladesh has an even higher population density. Those population density guidelines can only be applied directly to areas with similar sunshine. And sunshine per area of roof must also be considered. A quite accurate guide for sunshine is latitude. Sydney has a latitude of 34 degrees south, and generally any area between 35 south and 35 north will get at least similar total sunshine per year. Turns out 48% of global population lives within those limits, as shown in the area shaded orange on screen between 35 north and south, a rather significant percentage of the world's population. While in Australia and many other developed countries, rooftop solar has been economically viable for over a decade, recent huge price reductions means it's now viable, and with typically the same potential energy as in Sydney, everywhere within that zone that includes 48% of the world population. But how much less solar energy for the 2% living further south below the orange band, or the remaining 50% above who live further north, including our earlier examples of Brussels and Newark? Here's a table of latitudes and sunshine, with Newark at basically the same latitude as New York, and Brussels just slightly closer to the equator than London. As the table shows, solar panels need to increase to 30% more by Washington, 70% more by New York, and double by the latitude of London, and triple by the latitude of Helsinki. Even as far from the equator as Helsinki, with currently the best efficiency mass market solar panels, by reserving solar for domestic use only, you could get just about enough for domestic energy consumption, although that's excluding district heating systems. Increase panel efficiency to that 30% of the very latest panels, and you could do that comfortably. But storage, however, that's not so simple. Latitude of the location not only changes the total amount of annual sunshine, but even more significantly from a storage perspective, the longer summer days at high latitudes mean more hours of sunshine, and total energy levels can be quite comparable even with locations like Sydney in midsummer. But the difference really begins to show the rest of the year. And for example, solar energy in winter in Helsinki is 11 times lower than in Sydney. Plus, in warmer climates like Sydney, the highest energy consumption is for air conditioning in summer months when there's the most sun, as opposed to for heating in the winter months. Overall, as you move outside that orange zone, the contribution of rooftop solar to total required energy decreases, but remains well above zero. Belgium is not that far behind Australia on that earlier table for solar, and even at Helsinki's latitudes, a useful amount of energy is feasible, although storage challenge means battery or other storage technology prices still have a way to fall before that could be fully realised at Helsinki latitudes. Overall, yes, rooftop solar plus batteries, particularly with the move to LFP and then sodium batteries, can globally radically reduce consumers' total energy costs. But the economics are complex, and despite the potential to dramatically reduce energy spending for everyone in many countries, so far rooftop solar is producing savings for some, but increased prices for those most in need, an outcome that feeds outrage and at the same time corporate profits. While another video linked below further examines the details of the economics. Analysis reveals that overall, the significant majority of the world's population could become far less reliant on grid operators and have dramatically reduced energy prices. Yet, even in Australia, a seemingly ideal location, rooftop solar faces problems and barriers, with some problems linked to the belief and mindset that net zero requires making energy more expensive. In fact, the political party that specifically represents rural areas in Australia, where rooftop solar, meeting all consumers' energy needs is easiest, is the strongest campaigner against net zero by 2050. Guess what energy sources that party is convinced should be chosen? Highest costs win again. Like Trump, they're right in that energy policy doesn't need to be about net zero, but their beliefs and mindset, no doubt reinforced by lobbyists from energy and fossil fuel industry companies, prevents them even considering that it's possible for all rural Australians to move to effectively free energy. Yes, with our current approach that doesn't share the savings, the promise is not realised by those not able to switch to rooftop solar, and they still continue to face energy price rises. But those price rises would only accelerate as a result of adding energy from nuclear or coal. Note again that while presented as addressing the cost of living, Australia's current policies can effectively limit access to the savings to those who can most afford to pay, which may work against many in rural areas. While bringing cheap or near free energy to some, rooftop solar reduces the sale of the energy that funds the grid. A reduction in total energy purchased means funding the cost of the grid is spread over less kilowatt hours and forces a higher per kilowatt hour energy price in order to recover the fixed cost of operating the grid, and that can raise the cost for everyone without solar and or batteries, as those savings reduce the kilowatt hours bought, but not the price per kilowatt hour. This continues to feed the narrative that more renewables that are added, the higher electricity prices become, and feeds justified outrage amongst those who can't participate, and that includes those who most need the savings. For these people, the Donald Trump approach may even combat increases in power prices by removing net zero as justification for price rises, but only by ensuring no one gets the potential savings. But of course, the profits of corporations are protected. The current system not only limits the savings, it often means the savings do not show in price-oriented data and are not distributed beyond a select group. The result, feeding the outrage against renewables and avoiding everyone calling for their share of potential savings for renewable energy, not in 25 years' time, but, as many already experience, starting now. Yes, from an energy perspective, net zero by 2050 may have become a scam, as the call to make sacrifices to protect the planet may be being used to justify increased prices while moving to what, if done correctly, should be much cheaper energy.